Well, you ready to rock and roll on this one?
Let's do it.
Well, pretty. We're a little bit late on this topic. We had the 4th of July here. What? Oh,
Week and a
over a
half ago.
week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago. But the Declaration of Independence. I think most people obviously understand and know that it was us breaking officially from England or declaring our independence. But I think I would say the average American probably doesn't understand really what led up to that point, how we got there, as well as the contents that are in the actual Declaration of Independence. So I think it's useful for us to walk through that step by step, how the colonies got to that point of, all right, we're gonna declare independence, and how these, you know, 56 men that signed it are really signing their own death warrant, because they're committing an act of treason. So you gotta go back. It's at least a decade before this where things start to kind of get out of hand, and it starts really with the Stamp Act. So what the Stamp Act was British Parliament voted this in, and it was a tax on the American colonies. And it was a tax where they had to. It was a tax on basically every piece of paper they had to have this stamp to go with it. So whether it was contracts or just paper to just draw and write letters on, every piece of paper essentially. So, and the reasoning for that is actually pretty interesting. So Britain just fought the 7 Years' War, is what it's called, and
French
so
and Indian War.
their French and Indian War is what we commonly refer to it as now. And so there, if you're looking at Britain's view on this, it's, well, we provided obviously military, navy to fight this war, and the colonies didn't have to do anything here. And so this was a way essentially to help,
Well,
pay
they were in
for
debt.
the
I mean,
services that.
they won that war, but they were in
Go
a
ahead.
ton of debt from that war.
Yeah, yeah. And so they're viewing it as, well, the colonies, I mean, they're still British, and so we're going to put this tax on them to help us get us out of this debt. And you've got to think of it that way too, is they're viewing it as, we provide military to protect us and you guys, and but what the colonies' issue with it was they were saying, well, we don't have a vote in Parliament, so we don't have any representation there to vote on this for us. That's where you hear taxation without representation, and that's really where the fire gets lit.
Well, also, I think a
They
lot,
don't have a voice in any of it.
just kind of, I guess this is more like my thoughts. Like, yeah, Britain provided the military to fight this battle and I guess protect the colonies, but a lot of the colonists were the soldiers fighting in this, right? Like, they were fighting, so
Yeah,
they were giving, right?
yeah,
Like that's where George Washington got his military experience and start. Like, there were a lot of colonists that fought in this war, and that
yeah.
essentially that died in the war. So it's not like they were just like getting this free ride, and Britain was giving this military to protect them. I mean, they were that military partially.
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, that obviously only adds to the
Yeah.
colonists' rage about this.
Right. I guess I'm
And
just kind of
so,
almost devil's advocate, like seeing it from the colonist perspective. Like, one, we don't have representation. Two, like
well,
I left my
I'm
family
doing
and
the devil's
fought in
advocate.
that war. What's that?
Said I'm doing the devil's advocate.
Right. You're
I'm
going
giving
in
you the
Britain's.
British perspective
I guess
here.
I'm just giving the other perspective of where the
Yeah.
colonists were probably coming from, and at least what my mindset probably would have been. Like, okay, like
Yeah.
I went and fought in this war.
Right. Right. And so this is really where tensions really start to build, and specifically in Boston. That's where a lot of the hostility is in Boston. That's where you get the Sons of Liberty, Samuel Adams, kind of
Hancock.
leads that and creates this group of men that they fight against this, and a lot of times in violent ways as well. It's not just diplomatic ways that they're pushing against this. They revert to violence sometimes. Tar and feathering was something that they participated in.
A lot of what they did was like anonymous as well. They had like secret chapters of the Sons of Liberty, like it started in Boston, but then New York, and like it started to spread, and they did stuff anonymously, but wreaking a lot of havoc.
Yeah. And what adds to the tension here, we have the Boston Massacre that happens. Basically, it's a cold, snowy night. There's a British soldier standing watch outside of a building, and basically some locals, a lot of them I think were just homeless people too. They kind of start shouting and giving the soldier a hard time. Well, 7 other soldiers come out, to stand with him to make sure things don't get out of control. And then somebody shouts, they still don't know to this day, but somebody basically shouts, "Fire, fire." And then the shots ring out, and they shoot, and they kill some Boston people. And it's interesting, that whole story, because Paul Revere, he publishes a newspaper, and he paints this as these British soldiers just murdered.
Well, he like illustrated a picture of it even, and it's just this firing squad firing on these innocent colonists.
Yeah, which, if you actually read the true history of it, it sounds like they were being pretty hostile towards the soldiers. And
but
so
they took this as an opportunity, like those that were rebelling, I guess, against Britain. Like they took this as an opportunity to really try to emotionally and get a lot more colonists invested and show what Britain was doing.
Yeah, and that brings up, like, in today's world, it brings up an interesting thought. Like, obviously we view it as like this was something that helped spark us towards revolution, and we believe that God had his hand in the revolution. But you see things like that in today's world, this propaganda that's not telling the whole truth of the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as citizens, if we know the truth, we're rightfully so, we're outraged by what journalists or media is putting out there that isn't true, and it's just concocted to draw up a story a certain way. So it's interesting to think of it in that way. We still deal with it today, and we view it as a negative thing, but I mean, it was something that kind of was an essential piece to leading us down that road of revolution.
I think, history can be super messy. Like, it's easy just to think of this as like, oh, these guys were heroes and completely just in the right, and Britain was like, the British were just in the wrong. But when you like really learn about it, it's like, okay, if this happened today, like this would be a major debate in sides of like, whoa, wait, that's not what happened. Well, this is what happened, and you see, like you said, you see the same thing today. So it is interesting in trying to kind of, I think sometimes we morally like want to just like have the right and the wrong, and it gets murky sometimes, and it's like, okay, well, was Paul Revere right, just completely painting this so one-sided? Like, it probably wasn't the way that he illustrated it to be, but at the same time, like, it led to the birth of a new nation, and a lot of would change the world, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did an episode with Michelle Tanner a while ago. We'll actually have her on here again in a couple weeks. But something that she said on that was, the founding fathers would be viewed as extremists today. Yeah. They would be viewed as like radicals,
especially like the Sons of Liberty, like Samuel Adams, Paul Revere, John Hancock. These guys who were like really pushing this narrative that like Britain is out to get us, and they would have been.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the Stamp Act, we have the Boston Massacre, which really have ignited it. You had some other acts that were in place. The Townshend Acts, which was another tax. It was on glass, lead, paper, and tea. And so that's where you get. Well, there was enough pushback from the colonists that they actually do slowly repeal most of these taxes, except for they leave tea, and they leave it just to basically say, like, we still have control here.
Yeah.
We're in control here, and kind of send a message to the colonists. And so that's where the Boston Tea Party, you had Sons of Liberty, Samuel Adams, they dressed it up. They dressed up as Indians, disguised themselves as Indians, and they go out into the Boston Harbor where, these ships are that are transporting this tea to the colonies, and they dump it overboard. And it was like 90,000 pounds worth, which in today's dollars, it was like worth $1.7 million.
Yeah.
And so obviously you see at this point too, I think this is where Britain, I mean, you can understand why they did what they did, I guess, but in the long run, now that we have hindsight, it's what really led to their eventual downfall.
Yeah.
They invoked the Intolerable Acts,
So
which...
really quick on that, like going back to the Boston Tea Party, I've heard an interesting take where, like, you learn in school, like, well, they dressed up and disguised themselves as Indians and went down and did this, and I don't remember who it was, but it was an interesting take that, like, they weren't trying to disguise themselves. Like, the British know who's doing this, right? Like, they're not just disguising themselves to not get caught. It really was more an act of defiance, saying, like, we're natives to this land. We're not British. Like, we're natives to this land. Like, this is our native country, just like the Indians are natives here. So it wasn't necessarily like, oh, we're going to disguise ourselves and blame this on the Indians. Like, I think the British were smart enough to know, like, the Indians don't care about our tea on a ship. Like,
the
it
tea
wasn't
tax.
them. So it was more, I can't remember what his name is. He's a filmmaker. He's a documentary maker. He was on Joe Rogan, and he's coming out with the documentary for PBS. He does documentaries for PBS.
Oh, is it Ken Burns?
Yes. And I just thought that was super interesting. Like, it wasn't like they were, like, disguising themselves trying to not get caught. It was more like an act of defiance. Like, hey, we're native here. Like, this is our land. So I thought that was interesting, and kind of gives a different perspective into maybe what their mindset was.
Yeah.
Like, they were already seeing themselves as separated from Great Britain.
Yeah. And I mean, that would make sense, because obviously the British know the colonists are pissed off about taxes.
Yeah. Like, this
it's them that's going to be pouring tea over.
Act that the colonists have had, like, up to this point, they've been, like, burning the homes of British King George appointed governors, like Thomas Hutchinson, the king appointed governor of Boston, who was actually against these taxes, but it was his job to enforce them. Like, they've like burned his home and ran his family out of the colony. Like, he hightailed it back to England. Like,
and he was sympathetic. He was sympathetic with the Patriot cause.
He was against the taxes, but it was his job to enforce them. So, I don't think it was trying to disguise themselves. I think Britain knew full well who it was that did it.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's a good point. So this leads to, I mean, British Parliament, the Crown, I mean, freaking out, and so they enforced the Intolerable Acts, which it basically shuts down Boston Harbor, at least until the amount of tea that was thrown overboard is paid back, as well as Massachusetts now doesn't have the right to govern themselves. So it's all controlled by the Crown in England. As well as if British soldiers commit crimes while they're in Massachusetts, they can go back to England for a trial, which is going to be much more favorable rather than standing trial in Massachusetts at that time. So this is kind of really where you get... Oh, go ahead.
So what I was saying is also along with that is it was now British soldiers were occupying Boston to try to keep the peace, and the colonists had to house these soldiers and feed them, basically if the soldiers wanted to, they just run the colonists out of their house and take over their house and their food. So they were really imposing on the lives of these Boston colonists.
Yeah. And what's interesting at this point is with the colonies, I think we just kind of view it as the colonies picture themselves as, we view it as they picture themselves as they're part of Britain, but they're Americans and they're part of, they're the colonies. But really at that point, the way that they viewed themselves was they viewed themselves as members of their specific colony. So a man wouldn't say, I'm an American, or they would say, I'm a Virginian, or they identified themselves with the colony that they lived in. So they were very separate in that way. Whereas today, we view ourselves, obviously what state we're from, but overall we view ourselves as Americans. That's not how it was at that time with the colonies.
They were British.
They were British. But with this Intolerable Acts that Britain enforces, where they come over and they take over Massachusetts, this really is kind of what starts to really unite all the other colonies together, because they're viewing this and thinking this is not okay. If they can do this to Massachusetts, they can do it to the rest of us. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I feel like the unity of what is now America really kind of starts. The spark is lit, at least at that point. And so it's at this point now too that the Continental Congress is deciding, well, they have the Battle of Lexington and Concord, which that's the first actually open battle between the British and the colonists. In a battle which the colonists actually got the better of the British as well. But so once this happens, we're finally to the point where, the First Continental Congress is getting together because they need to discuss what the point of action is here, because this isn't just some small little feud that they're having. We're getting to the point where the British are they're trampling on our rights now, and so we need to decide what we're going to do here.
Well, and the colonists are at this point rather than just kind of being an annoyance, like they're fully pushing back. The reason that the battles of Lexington and Concord happened is because the colonists had they were storing arms to defend themselves from
they're local militias.
Like they're fully resisting the British at this point, rather than doing some riots and throwing some tea in the harbor. Like it's full resistance. So with that, I think King George is trying to just squash it at this point. So just tensions from both sides are just kind of through the roof. And
it's interesting when you put yourself in their shoes at that time. We always do that with big events in history. Where would I have been with this? Which side would I have been into? Because there were a lot of people that stayed loyal to the British Crown, loyalists. So and it was obviously a big stretch to say, all right, let's break off from these guys. Let's declare it, because first of all, Britain's the most powerful country in the world. They have the most powerful military in the world. Yeah. And declaring independence here, you're committing treason, which is punishment to death. Yeah. So you put yourself in a difficult place.
I think about the colonists, like, you're looking at that, like, okay, here's the strongest military force in the world. Like, what are we going to do? And then also, like, is life really that bad? Like, life's actually pretty good here in the colonies. Like, yes, it's annoying. Some rights are getting impeded on, but is it that bad? Is it worth committing our lives to? Like, the
tax that they
where
were
a lot of loyalists were coming from. Like, is this worth it? Like, these are still pretty good,
Well, and the tax that they were having to pay, really, put into perspective, it really wasn't that much.
Yeah.
But, I always, I consider myself a patriot, and, it makes me think to myself, man, how much stuff that happens in government today that I just
Like,
shrug my shoulders and like, whatever. Like it's not going to interrupt my
it's
life
not
that much.
it's not affecting my day to day. I hear people say that a lot. Like, well, it doesn't
Yeah.
affect my day to day.
Yeah. Yeah. Which most of this stuff, these taxes they had, it wasn't affecting most people's day to
I
day.
mean, when it got to the point where um, this British were occupying Boston, and
Yeah.
soldiers were moving into colonists' homes and stuff. Like at that point, it's like, okay, like this is
Yeah. Which though that was a direct result of
right.
the colonists'
They
reaction
had
to
pushed back
the
on smaller
taxes.
stuff to get it to that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we get now to the Continental Congress. All these different colonies, their representatives come and gather together in Philadelphia to discuss what should happen. And you do have some pushback. Majority is in favor of independence, but you do have people pushing back. And I mean, it's reasonable. They're saying, do you realize what we're doing here? Like, basically making the point that we were just making. Life is not that bad under British rule, and you're asking us to go up against the most powerful military in the world. So, but it's at this point that they formed a committee of 5 men to draft what is now the Declaration of Independence. It was I can pull it up here real quick. I know it was Thomas Jefferson, who was from Virginia, Benjamin Franklin from Pennsylvania, John Adams from Massachusetts, Roger Sherman from Connecticut, and Robert Livingston of New York. So those 5 men were appointed to draft a declaration, which is interesting. But the interesting thing, too, is they all agreed that Jefferson should be the one to draft it. Let me see here. I want to read John Adams' words because here we go. This is what John Adams said of Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson had the reputation of a masterly pen, and he could write 10 times better than I can. Which is interesting because in the Continental Congress, it was John Adams' speeches that really fired people up. So John Adams was very good at giving speeches and very elegant that way, and very good at creating emotion and getting people inspired. But Thomas Jefferson, who was a little more reserved, but he was masterful with a pen, and that's why they chose him to draft it, to write it, to be the author.
How old was Thomas Jefferson at this time? He was pretty young, right?
He was 33.
Okay.
How old are you?
34.
So he was a year younger than you.
Yeah.
You feel up to drafting a document declaring independence from the most powerful country on. I mean, it would be like the equivalent to you
Yeah.
writing a Declaration of Independence from the United States.
I think part of it too, like, just a thought that I had. Hindsight always gives you a different perspective. Like, because of what the United States of America has become, like, this is such a monumental thing. But at the time, like, they didn't know that America was gonna become what America is. They didn't know the impact that these words in this document would have on the world and human history moving forward. Like, they didn't know any of that. So it seems so impactful to us, but at the time, like, to them, it was just like, okay, it was still a big deal, but I think sometimes just looking in retrospect, it's like, whoa, like, that was so big because we know what it created, but
Yeah.
they didn't know any of that, right? It was just like, okay, how can we express our frustrations with Britain and a vision for what would like to see moving forward?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, yeah, it is, because he rented a two-bedroom apartment on the second floor of some building in Philadelphia, and that's where he sat down and he writes this. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure in that moment, like, he's just sitting in some little apartment, like,
Like, okay, what
see what I can
has
come
King
up with
George been
here.
doing to us? What is our vision for what we would like to have and self-govern ourselves? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just an interesting, like, try to put yourself in their perspective, like, so monumental and big and putting their lives on the line, but they didn't have the perspective of the true impact that this was going to make.
something interesting. Something that Jefferson said that I find interesting. Says that he later said that he didn't try to create anything new, just wanted to express the American mind,
Yeah.
which I mean, maybe at that time, but I mean, you read
But
the
I
Declaration of
think you
Independence,
go
that's a
through
pretty
it,
advanced mind.
and like a lot of the concepts in there, especially just talking about how government should be utilized, were new ideas.
Yeah,
At least in the world, like, government had never been like this before, and these God-given rights had never been truly expressed and declared in a way that they would be given to all.
yeah.
So,
And it takes him 17 days to draft this. And it's interesting who he draws like influence from when he writes this. He draws influence from John Locke's natural rights theory, which is life, liberty, and property, which property was originally what he drafted in there, was changed to pursuit of happiness. George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights, which Thomas Jefferson was a Virginian, and that was written just a month prior. So that was probably something fresh on his mind. The Bible was something that he drew from, and then his own deep anger at what the crown had done, which is pretty evident if you read the
yeah,
Declaration of Independence. He has a lot of things to say about King George.
that's like, so I guess when you do say those things, like, they weren't new ideas to
No,
him.
yeah,
They really weren't. They just hadn't been implemented to the level that they would be.
yeah, yeah, and it's interesting too. Because that's probably the line that people most know is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Uh-huh.
You know, and that originally life, liberty, and property, which, I mean, part of it's just because of my field of work. I mean, I still really like, I would have been fine if it had been that as well. But the pursuit of happiness is a powerful thing because um, it's
I think it
it's
just,
just everybody having their agency to really decide their own destiny. And I like that it's not just life, liberty, and happiness.
yeah,
It's life, liberty, which is given to you by God, but happiness is not.
yeah.
But you have the right to the pursuit of happiness. That's on you.
Yeah, I think it just, that language, I think, captures the American dream really well, right? Like, that's why people
Yeah.
from all over the world come to America, is for the liberty to have they have the liberty so that they can pursue happiness. They can pursue their dream. They can create a better life. But that's what it's what you create. It's not a
Yeah.
guaranteed life, liberty, like you said, and happiness. Like, it's not just given to you, but you have the
Yeah.
right to create that happiness or that life that you want.
Yeah. I think of kind of our current um, political environment and just exactly what you were saying. I think that that's, in my opinion, where a lot of where our issues are today is. I think most people view our country as taking the pursuit part out of it. It's just I am
entitled.
I'm entitled
Yeah,
to happiness.
this
You
should be
know,
provided for me.
right? Instead of, well, no, you're not entitled to happiness. You're entitled to the pursuit of happiness.
Is what you
And
do
that's
with that.
something that is fully on your shoulders, and that's part of what I love about the the design of government that Adams Jefferson is creating here is there are certain unalienable rights from God,
Mm-hmm.
but if you want to live the full experience and have the most success in things, it also is coming back to you too. It's not just going to be handed to you, but you're expected to work. You're expected to put forth effort. So I want to get your thoughts on this real quick too, because in his original draft too, he had harsh condemnation of King George's support for slavery. He called it a cruel war against human nature itself, but it was taken out because there were southern delegates, especially from Georgia and South Carolina. They demanded the section to be cut, and Congress, needing unity, agreed to it. And Jefferson was pretty furious about this, but seeing the overall big picture of we need unity here and we need to get something forward here.
Yeah.
So his it was a compromise that he made. In today's world, again, having hindsight, I mean, what's your thoughts on that? Because people might today's world think that, well, that was evil to take that out, and
Yeah, I think like we talked about before, like history's messy. you know, I think we just so much want to just like have the moral right and the moral wrong, and these guys were in the right, and um, it is interesting. It is interesting that he originally did put that in there, and that was on his mind and a lot of colonists' mind. I think, like you said, there was probably some negotiation and compromise to be made to make this go through. If you think about it, if they didn't have all of the colonies on board, would the revolution have been successful as it was? Right? Like, it wouldn't have been the United States of America because later we fought a civil war over this. At the time, if they would not have been unified, would we have been successful? What would have the outcome have been? So I don't know. Maybe in their minds, it was like, okay, like
so
we got to make a compromise. But I think it is interesting that he did leave in there the opportunity for slavery to be abolished when he says that all men are created equal, right? So he left that language in there, like, I don't know, maybe that was like, hey, one step at a time, like we got to first get independence, and I, you know,
yeah.
but had they put it in there and had those southern colonies not been unified with them and not been on board, likely potentially have joined the British in fighting against them, in this revolution and fighting against the colon, like, would it have turned out the way that it did? There's probably a good chance it wouldn't have.
So are you saying that it was worth it?
I mean, I don't think it would have turned out the way that it did.
Yeah.
Obviously, the slaves between that period of time and the Civil War, like to them, it was like, well, crap. But like hindsight looking back, all men are created equal, and now all men do have those on certain unalienable rights.
What about the idea that Jefferson was a hypocrite
Because he
for
had
saying
slaves.
all this? Because he owned slaves his whole
Yeah,
entire life.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I don't really have like a right answer to that.
Yeah.
Like I think that's something that maybe a lot of people would push back on. against America and the founding of America. And I don't know his mindset. I don't know the state of his slaves or any of that. Like you know,
Well, George Washington was the same. He had slaves,
slaves.
but he was also, he did not like the idea of slavery.
Yeah,
He also was one that thought it was wrong. Yet, these men, they held slaves their entire lives. So, I mean, it's an interesting conversation, but I think people, I'm kind of playing devil's advocate,
no, yeah,
and throwing these at you.
it's a
Um,
good question. It's hard to for me, and obviously there's probably a lot more you can study and learn and perspectives you can gain, but it's just so hard to like put our cultural ethics that we have today on a different time period, right? Like
yeah,
it was so different, and clearly, like they vocalized they were against slavery, but I, like they didn't live in our time where there's, I don't know,
yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
I do, and
Clearly, but it's
it,
just
it's a,
hard to put
it's
our ethics now,
yeah.
society, and culturally, in a completely different time.
Yeah, well, you can't judge history by today's standards. You
Exactly.
just can't do that. And my perspective and view on it is, yeah, they did own slaves. They both also said it was wrong. Man, there's so many things though today that we think is wrong that we want Congress to change or do different, but they haven't yet. We could probably live our lives in a way that is uniform with what we want them to do differently, but we don't because it hasn't been changed. But I think it goes to show how ahead of their time these men
Right.
actually were. They're
Yeah.
he's wanting to put that in the Declaration of Independence, and he did not live in a society that was ready for that, but he made it so that we had a way to, like you said,
Yeah.
all men are created equal. We had a way in the future that, yeah, we could fulfill that promise, and we could get to that point that he envisioned
Yeah.
of slavery being done and away with.
Yeah, it was an ongoing process. It wasn't just like declare independence, win the Revolutionary War, and then it's all perfect. Like they didn't even have the Constitution for a long time after the Revolutionary War, and then like it's just a process getting those things in place, and it's still ongoing, right? Like
Yeah,
so. And I think back to your perspective, kind of that argument. Well, they were hypocrites. Thomas Jefferson was a hypocrite, and where you can't judge history by today's standards. You could kind of flip that. I think there's a lot of things today culturally that are the norm or okay that they would say, "Whoa, that is evil.
yeah,
That is completely evil. Like that is not
yeah,
right." So it's like if they, can they could they judge us based on society today
yeah,
and things that are okay in our society?
yeah.
What
No,
would
that's a
you say
great
to
point.
that? Like, oh, well, like so. I think you can look at it both ways. Like, there are absolutely things that are part of our society today that would be viewed as completely demonic and evil.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's a good point. It's a good point. Um, but I mean, getting back now to the Declaration of Independence. So, like I said, he had this section about slavery. Um, the mostly the southern colonies, they wanted it out of there. Had to compromise here, and so they took it out of there. But the final version of the Declaration of Independence, it is approved on July 4th. Now, July 2nd was when the Continental Congress actually voted to declare independence. And so John Adams actually thought July 2nd would be remembered as Independence Day, but we celebrate it as July 4th because that's the day that the final version of the Declaration of Independence was approved and was was put out there. So, I mean, is there anything though? I guess the contents of the Declaration itself that really stand out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot to read through, but some of the things that really stand out to me. So that first paragraph is basically declaring the need for the cause of separation, and that it's, that you need to declare the causes that impel you to the separation. And then the second paragraph is kind of like what holds a lot of the meat of the Declaration of Independence. So we've already talked about some of these, but one, Thomas Jefferson, he uses the language, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." So it's not like, well, we believe or we think, like, no, this is self-evident. This is fact. This is, like there's not wiggle room, like self-evident. So all men are created equal. So he declares that fact, which we talked about. I think that's interesting that stayed in there. And I mean, Abraham Lincoln uses that in the Gettysburg Address, right?
Yeah.
To impel us to abolish slavery. Like, we're founded on the principle that all men are created equal. So I think that language right there is powerful and led to, like we talked about, the abolishment of slavery and freedom for all men. And you could even go further throughout history, and women's rights and women's suffrage and all that. Like that, it just encompasses everyone, right? It's pretty clear. It doesn't exclude anyone or any group of people, but all men are created equal. And then he brings God into this, right? He brings the Almighty into it, saying they are endowed by their Creator, so God-given rights that are rights for all: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and we've already talked about those as well. I think it's interesting in those first few lines, just the language that he uses, like some of the main ones: self-evident, all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights. And then we talked about the pursuit of happiness and what that really means. It's not a guarantee. It's not that we're just entitled to have everything or to be completely taken care of, but we have the right to pursue that happiness. We have the right to pursue those, nowadays, like those conveniences of life and security, really. So then he says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So government is solely purpose is to defend these rights. And government's power comes from the consent of the governed. So we the people. Like, we are governed by the people. We're not governed by a king. So he's really putting this in the hands of the people, of the colonists. And then he basically says when a form of government oversteps their bounds and they start to take away these rights or abolish it, the people have the right to alter or to abolish and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such forms as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So, the government is for the people, by the people. If that government starts to encroach on those unalienable God-given rights, it's the people's responsibility to change or abolish that government and to institute a new one based upon the rights that they seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So he's kind of justifying what they are doing.
Yeah.
Justifying, well, this is what is happening to us, and this is our right, our responsibility, probably more so. I bet they felt it as a responsibility. We talked about kind of the weightiness and the the consequences of them doing this, but
Hmm.
I think I would like to think that they felt a responsibility to do this based on what he's stating are their beliefs and perspectives, and um, so yeah, just some interesting verbiage. I really like in that. There's other things as you go through that first paragraph. I think it's interesting that he says, where did it go? So he says, prudence indeed will dictate the government's long establishment should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shewn that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So we kind of talked about the loyalists and how it was like, well, it's not that bad. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I'll just endure this. But then he kind of says that, like, experience shows that, like, men are more likely and more willing just to suffer these rights being imposed upon than to stand up and to um, abolish this government. Yeah.
Mm.
So,
Man, that would have been interesting when, being, let's say, King George, and obviously it took weeks, even months, to get news across the ocean there at that time. But man, if you could have been a fly on the wall when he first saw this,
yeah.
saw this
Yeah.
declaration,
Well, and
that would have
yeah.
been interesting to see.
Yeah, because right after, like what I just said, right after that, the bulk of the Declaration of Independence is Thomas Jefferson just calling out every one of King George's offenses against the colonists and how he is
Yeah.
impeding on these unalienable rights. And so, yeah, like watching King George read that, like, it would be interesting to see kind of his reaction to it.
Yeah.
But and that's what he does is he calls out all of King George's um, offenses against the colonists. So I'm not going to go through all those. We've kind of talked about a lot of them and what led up to the Declaration. But just like the last paragraph, so he says, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. So again, he's invoking God and basically saying, like, we believe God's on our side. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So, I this shows the faith of these men as well. It
Yeah.
basically says we're putting this in God's hand. We're relying on His divine protection, and we're signing our names with our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Like everything that we have, we're going to sign this document because we feel that this is the right thing to do. So,
Yeah. I think back to the 56 men who signed it, and again, they were signing their own death warrant, because if this revolution didn't work, they were all going to be hanged. But to give you an idea of what happened to some of these men, there were 5 of them that were captured and tortured. 12 of them had their homes burned. 17 lost everything that they owned, and 9 of them died in the war. Specific examples: Thomas Nelson Jr., he told Washington to fire on his home because there was British soldiers in his home, so he told him, fire, destroy my home.
yeah.
Francis Lewis, he lost his wife to a British prison. And then, of course, you have John Hancock that wrote his name so big because he wanted to make sure that the King George could read it without his glasses on.
Yeah, that's what he said, right? Like, I want King George to read it without his
this
spectacles.
this wasn't. I mean, because you see it so much in today's world, a lot of stuff is just political posturing. This wasn't political posturing at all. I mean, it was just courage, grit, and a giant middle finger to King George.
Yeah, like I didn't read this part at the beginning of that last paragraph, basically is where they declare independence. But it says, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions due in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. So, like, pretty clear, we are not part of Great Britain anymore.
Yeah.
So,
And again, it's also demonstrating the unity that's happening in the colonies now.
Yeah.
It's not just separate, Virginian and New Yorker. We're all coming together. We are our own nation. We're Americans now, essentially.
I like, again, too, like, I mean, our motto is "In God We Trust," right? He says here, so we therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. So again, he's bringing God into it. Like, we're appealing to him. He knows our intentions.
Yeah.
So I think that's cool. Like, there's a lot of places within the Declaration of Independence where they brought God into it and kind of showed their faith in God and his divine protection. And I think they felt like they were on God's side.
Yeah. Yeah. That our rights come from God, not the government, and the power flows through the people. And if anything threatens the liberty, the people have the duty to resist.
Yeah. And that's part of God's plan, right? And the nature of God is that we all have agency to choose right and wrong. Yeah. We aren't to be forced to do right or wrong. We're told what to do, but we have our choice. We have liberty.
It's interesting to think too. I did a recent just kind of research and study on the religious ideologies of the founding fathers, and it's very diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Their theological thinking, but they all have really the one common thread, which is the Almighty or Providence. I always think that the words that they used back then to describe God is cool. Like Providence, I think that's cool.
Divine Providence.
Yeah.
The Almighty, the supreme judge of the world. Is that what he said here? Yeah, supreme judge of the world.
Yeah. But it's interesting too, like, I always think about people who don't believe in God, or even at this time, they don't believe in God. Like, how, I guess I don't understand how you view that. Like, how, in what way do they view a document like the Declaration of Independence? Or even for that matter, the whole revolution in general, because throughout the whole thing, they invoke the Almighty all the time. And so, is it just our nation was created by happy accident to people that
was it not belief? Any divine intervention? Like, was it just luck that they were able to defeat the British?
Yeah, which for all of this, it's for me, it's further evidence that there is a supreme creator. That because all of the miracles and things that happened in order for the revolution to succeed. I mean, I don't. There's no other explanation. Even the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the fact that we still have this form of government, and I mean, government's not perfect, obviously, but I would say it's the most perfect form of government on the earth today,
Yeah.
And all these other countries, I mean, they've, you know, since this 1776, you know, they've drawn from our documents, and then later, obviously, the Constitution. So I don't see any other way to view it other than,
Yeah.
yeah, God had his hand in this.
Well, and if you look at it, shortly after the Revolution and the Constitutional Congress, and it was in place, just like the religious excitement and revival that happened
Hmm.
within the colonies because of the freedom of religion, and people were able to worship God how um, they understood and felt to worship God. It was is pretty remarkable. Like, you know,
Yeah,
like
yeah, I
people
think,
hadn't had necessarily that kind of complete freedom in religion,
yeah.
worship how
I mean,
they
especially, you know, your faith and my faith. I mean,
yeah. That's a
it's a
huge part of our
direct
faith.
result of this. It's a
Yeah,
direct consequence from
yeah.
this.
But you look at other faiths as well. I think it was no accident that there was just such religious excitement going on.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and yeah, I would just close with, in today's world, I think that part of the big problem that we have is people don't understand, really just what these documents meant and what these men actually were putting on the line, what they actually went through, and the wisdom and knowledge of these men as well. You have much greater appreciation for our country, much, you know, bigger sense of pride and patriotism when you realize that these men were giving up everything and devoting everything to this cause. And I think that in order to ignite that feeling of pride in our country and patriotism, you've got to understand the history behind it. Some people think history is boring, but I think history, especially American history, it is the greatest igniter of patriotism for anybody. It should be, and that's certainly where my patriotism stems from. It stems from learning about all of these things that happened in order for us to be where we're at as a country now, and these men that came before us, and the knowledge that they had. I mean, I can't believe, 33 years old, that Thomas Jefferson could write a document like that. It's unthinkable for me. I mean, I'm a few
Yeah.
years younger, I guess. Maybe in a few years I'll be as wise as that I could put that, but I really doubt it. So
Especially with the consequences that weighed over his head in writing it. You know,
yeah. Well, the consequence was death.
it wasn't just like writing a report for school.
Yeah.
Like there was some major consequences if it didn't
Yep.
work. I think I love if you haven't, anyone who's listening, if you haven't read the Declaration of Independence like all the way through, I would definitely encourage you to do it because there's so many little things. Like every time I read it, there's other little things that I pick up on. And one thing I've talked about tonight is just how much they do mention God and their trust in God and God as their judge and God as their creator and God as their protector. Um, I I think it's real interesting. I like there's a quote from Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War when I think someone asked him, "Do you think is God on our side? On the North side, fighting to abolish slavery?" And Abraham Lincoln said, I don't. I'm not worried about that. I'm just worried about if I am on God's side."
Yeah.
And so just trying to be on God's side. And I think that that's where these founding fathers were. Like, not is God on our side, like we're in the right, but more like, what does God want us to do? Are we on God's side?
Yeah.
Um,
I think
I
that's a
like that.
perfect message for today's world as well.
Yeah, and like we talk about, there's some messy things about history, and some things like you look at the Sons of Liberty and like what like that could be so
Yeah.
controversial, and who's to say if it was right or wrong? But I think in the end, the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, um, the the winning of the Revolutionary War, and then later on the drafting and implementation of the Constitution. I think that was all God inspired. I think that they were on God's side in doing those things to see what came of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks for the awesome conversation here. A topic that I think is very much overlooked and not studied enough by the average American. So the challenge would be go home and read and study the Declaration of Independence. Read it and try at your best to understand it and make it a continual thing. Don't just read it once and never read it again. I think it's something we should continually study and try our best to understand it. Because if we understand our history, we're going to be much more prepared to have a successful future. So, anyways, thanks, Bracken. Thanks for
It was awesome.
listening to the United States of Grit. Subscribe, give us a like, shoot us a message if there's a certain topic you'd like us to cover. But until then, we'll see you later.